Okay, let's go to Heat Bucks now. The Heat are up 1-0 in this series. And I think we're going to get into, let's start with the bigger picture, hot takey conversation about the charge. You and I have long been proponents of how much we hate the charge. And I think that like a lot of people have said we have to completely abolish the charge. I don't even think you and I are like completely on that boat.
No.
To me, the rule change with the charge is like pretty simple. If a player is airborne, it can't be a charge just by standing underneath him and holding your balls. If a player is on the ground and driving, it can be a charge. I think that that's like a reasonable accommodation across the board that makes it a little bit easier to officiate, which is the biggest thing here to me. Like basketball players have gotten so athletic, so fast that the charge is very difficult to officiate. Yes. If we can make it easier to officiate, I think that it just helps by leaps and bounds in terms of improving it. To me, it's if a player is going to get airborne, it can't be a charge. If a player's on the ground and like barreling a shoulder into somebody or like using an off arm, it can be a charge. Where are you at on the charge? Because obviously this has now played an integral role in this series following the Kevin Love, Giannis Antetokounmpo incident where Giannis is now doubtful, I believe, for game 2 with this hip injury, according to Eric Name and the Milwaukee Bucks. Having released their injury report.
Yeah, primary defenders can draw on-ball charges because to me that's a player control issue. It happens at the point of attack where you can talk more about legal guarding position. I have a really tough time with secondary defenders being a legal guarding position because they're not really guarding the play, or at least guarding the driver and the player from a primary standpoint. On the perimeter, there's been such a huge emphasis on landing space for shooters. Because as soon as they get airborne, it's dangerous for them to come down on ankles or feet. And that has been a point of emphasis at the NBA level the last couple of years. I've never been able to wrap my head around why something like this is different. That if an airborne player tries to make a play at the rim, he should be entitled to come down and have that space. Right now, the burden has been on referees to watch for whether contact is square and if the player arrives just in time on the defensive end of the floor. I think the burden has to be completely lowered to arrived before the offensive player even takes off. That's really the change that would happen to me. I am so colored and biased by watching high school basketball which is my full-time job, and how poorly officiated the charge rule is at that level, how poor the mechanics are of guys who try to slide in and take them, and the dangerous plays that happen as a result of it. One of my first years as a college coach, we lost our all-conference point guard in the opening game of the season to a charge call, and broke his thumb and was out for the next month and a half. We lost 11 games straight. These things where players get hurt in these situations are easily avoidable, not necessarily by completely banning the charge or rewriting the rule book as it is, but changing the way that we enforce and what we reward for help defenders to do.
I think that's 100% right. I love the idea of a weak side defender. It gets a little bit tricky because I do think that there are times where a weak side defender probably should be able to like come in and like hold his ground if a player just like barrels his shoulder into you. As opposed to like a weak side defender coming in and just like trying to set his feet and hold his nuts and like stand there and just try and take a charge. It's not athletic. The best point that you brought up is the landing space ideal. It's not only is it nonsensical that we care this much about non-logical, let's say, that we care this much about jump shooters landing space, whereas we don't care about plays at the rim. Those plays at the rim are drastically more dangerous.
Much.
They are so much more dangerous for the player that is airborne. It eludes me that we want to see the most athletic players in the league because proportionally, those are the guys who are being hindered by this. it eludes me that we are actually trying to put like basically restrictor plates on these guys that are the most athletic players in the league. And then also we're putting them most at risk by not having a landing space rule around the basket. This just feels like one of those things that is such an archaic ideal within old-timey basketball that like fucking Dick Vitale is probably super excited about talking about how he thinks the charge should be implemented forever. I just can't get there. Like we've been very clear on this show throughout its history that we think the charge needs overhauled. It does not need abolished. It needs overhauled. And I think it's a very simple rule. If a player is on the ground and is not airborne and he barrels his shoulder into somebody or he like does something like that, it can be a charge. If a player is airborne, you should not be able to take a charge like that. I think it is a dangerous play. And I think we saw it, and it unfortunately looks like it's going to have a significant impact on this series now, because I frankly don't even know how to break down this Heat Bucks series at this point. Because if Giannis is not there, I think the Heat probably win this series. Just straight up, I do. I've talked a lot about how I think the Bucks have a really good supporting cast with Drew Holiday, Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton, certainly. But like, they're number 2, number 3, number 4 options. They're not Jimmy Butler. And look, we need to talk about the fact that Heat have their own injury issues. Tyler Hero has broken his wrist. And by the way, I think or was it his hand? He like made a 3-pointer after breaking his.
Did he make it? Like I
thought he made it.
I have no idea what happened on that play other than he's standing there like shaking his hand. Someone passes him the ball and he like quickly, I got to get it up. And then he's shaking it. That was weird.
Crazy. But here's where I'll just pose it to you and, hit the ball back to you like we're on a tennis court. What does this series look like moving forward without Giannis if that ends up being the reality of this series?
Without Giannis, the offensive approach that the Bucks take is going to change drastically. I think that they need to mismatch hunt a hell of a lot more. I think that they need to play through Brook Lopez or Bobby Portis more inside, particularly Lopez. I think Middleton has to be great. He has to be all-star level Chris Middleton in order for them to really move on. And that's going to be a hard thing to do when the guy who's probably guarding him is Jimmy Butler, who is one of the more intense matchups that you can find in a playoff series. I think it's worth noting on the other end of the floor that Brooklyn is probably more likely to be in a drop and more likely to play heavier Brook Lopez minutes, knowing that they don't have that Giannis at the 5 in their back pocket that they can go to in a lot of those different instances. And what that means is Miami can probably get a lot of pull-up jumpers in the mid-range off against that drop coverage. They will miss Tyler Hero's ability without question to be able to do stuff like that. But I think that this is a like Jimmy Butler licking his chops. It's his time to cook type of offense that if they can steal both of them here in Milwaukee, this is a really, really fascinating spot to be in going back home to South Beach.
Completely agree with you. What I will say here as well is, look, the Heat generally take a lot of threes. Like they're more than happy to, drive and kick, spray it out to Max Strus, spray it out to Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry, like certainly all those guys, right? Kevin Love now that he's on the roster, etc. The Heat, even with that being said, did not have a game this season where they shot 60% from 3 like they did in this game. And they only had, I'm just like kind of counting, on, almost my hand here. They had like basically 15, 16 games this year where they made 15 threes. Yep. To only do so on 25 3-point attempts, because that is what Milwaukee's defense is trying to do. They're trying to force you into mid-range opportunities and trying to feed you into Brook to be able to allow him to be a high-level rim protector at the basket, and then like really closing out hard on 3-point shooters. For the Heat to have made this many threes while only attempting 25 of them, by the way, the Heat only attempted 25 or fewer threes in 4 games this season. Yeah. So the Bucks scheme, even without Giannis for a large portion of the game, kind of worked defensively. Like the shot mix that Miami got was kind of what Milwaukee wanted. It's just also that you have Giannis closing out on some of these 3-point shooters instead of, X, Y, and Z replacement level defender, like Jay Crowder playing 12 minutes, Wes Matthews being forced into 18 minutes, Javon Carter playing 23 minutes, Bobby Portis playing 27, right? Like it felt like there wasn't like a 1-for-1 guy that came in, probably Bobby a little bit more than anybody else, but they kind of spread the minutes out over the course of the bench and tried a lot of different lineups to really make it work. But the scheme, I thought, was good. It's just that Miami drilled a ton of threes. And then on top of it, like if, they're going to turn it over 13 times and then Miami's going to be able to get out and transition, like it becomes trickier in those settings when you're turning it over 13 times, when Giannis isn't really involved in a lot of those turnovers.
Yeah. I mean, look, it was a 13-point win for Miami, but there were moments where it got closer down the stretch. And for Milwaukee to have it that close in a game where Miami shoots 60% from the field, 60% from 3, has an insane game from Kevin Love from 3 going 4 of 7, to have the Caleb Martin and 1 takeover down the stretch where he hits 2 like really tough and 1 buckets in a row.
Yep.
I think all things considered, like this wasn't this runaway, like dominant Miami game start to finish. And I don't think Kevin Love's going to shoot it that way again, where maybe that ends up being the mismatch that Miami wants to keep pressing the button on time and time and time again. But I still think that there are opportunities to attack Kevin Love more on the offensive end, even when you don't have Giannis in the game. And Milwaukee's got to go mismatch hunting a little bit more.
So, Miami got 10 for 15 from 3 from Gabe Vincent, Kevin Love, and Caleb Martin in this game. Maybe it happens again, like by the law of, mathematics, it's possible, but it seems like that is going to be difficult to expect every night. Let's say that, and it won't happen every night. So I don't know how to break down the series right now beyond hoping that we get to see Giannis again. Giannis has had an incredible season. He would have been my pick for MVP, as I stated, on the awards podcast that I did with Schindler. But without him, I think one show that I did with Jason Timp over at Hoops Tonight, over at the Volume Network earlier this year, was in regard to what guy has the best supporting cast among the MVP candidates. And I said that I thought when Chris Middleton was healthy, the Bucks probably had the best supporting cast for their star. And then I thought Denver actually had the best supporting cast outside of them. And then Philadelphia, also had a great supporting cast as well. But I thought that, the roster makes a lot of sense around Joel, but doesn't make quite as much sense as the starters make sense around Jokic in terms of offensive production. And obviously Giannis did not have Chris Middleton the entire season, did not have Drew Holiday, did not have, Brook Lopez for almost all the season, but did not have Drew Holiday for 20 games this year, did not have Chris Middleton basically for 60 of them by the time he got healthy after his first 10 games, just kind of feeling his way back in. And I thought that Giannis's supporting cast over the course of the entire season was probably the worst out of the group. We're now going to find out how good Giannis's supporting cast is. I don't think if Giannis, I think Giannis is going to play again in this series. If Giannis was not playing in the series, I would pick Miami. I would. at this point. But we're going to see Giannis again, and we're going to have to see what percentage health he is.
Yeah, it's a crucial game too, Sam. A crucial game too, because going down 0-2 for Milwaukee, heading to Miami, eh, that's a tough situation to be in. I think Budenholzer's got to coach his ass off. He's got to hit every right button. We need good games from Middleton and Drew scoring the basketball. And I think, again, mismatch hunting, finding ways to play Kevin Love off the floor. If Miami does experiment and dust off like a Duncan Robinson a little bit more because they feel like they need some more floor spacing, like punish him immediately. Make sure that he's unplayable in that series. Like they need to be able to do some of this stuff on the offensive end to produce enough without Giannis in the lineup.
The last point that I want to make here, I thought this game was an absolute Jimmy Butler masterclass.
Yeah, he's great.
Like in every single respect, I thought Jimmy was essentially perfect in this game. He took over offensively when it was necessary. He is the guy that like is more than happy to take those mid-range shots. But I also think he did a really good job of engaging both the drop defender and trying to like force that man to get back to his hip before Brook could get back, or forcing the help man that was like tagging Bam on the roll to stick just that extra split second longer. And I thought he created a lot of those open kick out 3-pointers by being patient and by just very intelligently and methodically breaking down exactly what Miami was doing. Now, it becomes way more difficult to do that when Giannis is on the court, because Giannis is so big and so long and takes up so much space and covers so much ground getting out to the 3-point line. But I thought that Jimmy did a great job of doing exactly what had to be done in order to have success.
Yeah, he's playoff Jimmy Butler is here, and he's him.
He is. Jimmy is very good.